Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we're bringing you our sixth and final read of Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. And in this read, we get a nice bow tie to wrap up everything that's in the story. But what I wanted to talk about is something that's much more prevalent in the current media cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and that's Dave Chang and this whole chili crunch controversy.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those that don't know, recently what's come out is that Dave Chang, or David Chang, a very prominent business owner, chef, he started a couple restaurants, including Momofuku, Sambar, a couple different places, and also gave the space for people like Christina Tosi to arise. And he's a really, really seemingly good chef. I've never been to his restaurant. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
you've been to his
I
restaurants,
haven't yet.
but we've seen so much of his content. The interesting thing is this week, he decided to, along with his team, trademark the words Chili Crunch, which is a product that he invented during the pandemic. And many more people have been coming out with it in different versions. Now, I found out more to the story, but what were your initial thoughts when you heard about this?
My initial thoughts were that he shouldn't gatekeep the words chili crunch.
Hmm.
Although he came up with this new formula for chili oils and made it his own,
Hmm.
I don't think it's fair to the Asian American community to tell other people that they can't use chili crunch.
Right. And I think amongst the community of Asian people, just kind of as a large diaspora, there
Yeah.
was a lot of outrage for this decision for his team to be going through with these lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
For me, one of my bigger issues was that as someone who grew up in a very Korean environment and household, seeing his food, which is much more Americanized and it's changed to fit the culture and the people that he's around, which is the smart business decision to do. He is a Korean American who is a Japanese trained chef that is now making I think, Chinese
Yeah,
based food item.
exactly.
I had some issues with that to a certain extent, and definitely taking this name seemed like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What I then found out, so I try not to blame without having facts.
Mm.
And one of the things that I do listen to is David Chang's podcast. And so recently he actually had an episode where he came out and tried to explain himself and explain what had actually happened. So when I listened to the episode, some of the story that they told is that Chili Crunch was actually supposed to be separated from what he believed to be, I cannot say this name, but it's the one with the grandmother on the cover.
Yeah,
It's the one that we eat all the time.
totally.
But that one was always said to be the chili crisp. He wanted to separate himself from that by calling it chili crunch. From what I understand from what he told, they had not originally created the trademark. They were actually sued against the trademark by another company that had prior ownership of it. So they actually ended up working with that company to buy this trademark and then worked with that previous company to allow them for usage.
Hmm.
There's a whole lot of stuff in there about having to go through with carrying out cease and desist letters to make this still a viable trademark, or else it enters the public domain. So their reasoning for it is that they felt like they needed to create ownership, or else it would enter the atmosphere of anyone picking up the word chili crunch, and that would just open up the gates to whoever to own it.
Hmm.
In the end of that podcast, what he said was that he would no longer carry through with lawsuits. He said he was willing to risk whatever happens to the name Chili Crunch, but he no longer wanted to be the one to enforce this trademark. He also talked about if anyone else had a plan, like giving this to a nonprofit or someone that could then actually go through with carrying out the process of deciding who gets to use the words chili crunch or not. It seems like Dave Chang either made a mistake and is now trying to rectify it,
Mm-hmm.
or he never meant to hurt in the first place.
Which is fair. Unfortunately, because he's such a big name and a celebrity chef at that, so many people are looking up to him or already trying to enter the market with him as this big conglomerate.
Right. My issue with some of those statements is that this is why we hire diversity. This
Mm-hmm.
is why we hire people of different backgrounds so that this can get caught earlier.
Mm,
Someone on the team could say, this is not an appropriate thing to name it. Now, it takes a very open office and an open community for people that are on the lower end of the pay scale to feel like they can come up with this to the bosses. But this is why we keep an open community.
right.
Where I get caught is I think he does have a diversified group of people.
Mm-hmm.
One of his friends, I would assume, actually co-host of the show, is also of Chinese background.
Yes.
So it makes me curious of why this wasn't ever questioned or ever thought of, because the word crisp and crunch apparently are somewhat exchangeable within Mandarin from the explanation that they gave. So why was this never stopped? I want to give him the reasonable doubt that he never meant to do harm or create barriers,
Mm-hmm.
but it definitely leaves a funny feeling of distrust, I guess.
Exactly. And the fact that he doesn't want to pursue lawsuits kind of defeats the purpose of having the trademark in the first place. And I get that the initial impetus was that another company was trying to sue them, but why not in that time frame pivot so that they didn't have to go through that instead?
So that's where they bring up the fragility of this whole thing.
Fair.
It's kind of like you can't claim it or else no one else gets to use it. You
Mm-hmm.
also can't just give it up or else it enters this public atmosphere where there's someone else can say, well, that's our trademark now because of the fact that no one decided to protect it.
Mm,
So the way that it was explained at least made a lot of sense of why they felt the need to do it in the way that they did,
right.
if that's truly the reason,
Mm-hmm.
but it's hard to really know. The sad part is that this is one of those things that creates more of a division amongst Asian communities and cultures.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
now it kind of becomes this thing of like, well, Dave Chang is Korean. Why is he doing Chinese products? And I remember even when this product was first released, there was that sentiment that was being sent out into the atmosphere of why is he taking over the space? When he
Mm-hmm.
made Japanese food, it's because he went to Japan and learned and studied. I was like, okay, that makes sense. But it didn't make sense of why he felt like he needed to take this space from Chinese people or Chinese cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always on the books of something that people were worried with. So this trademark then brought up more concern.
Exactly. And I totally agree. It leaves a yucky feeling
Mhm.
behind, regardless of the reasoning.
Right. I want to say and believe that he did not do this on purpose, and there was just something along the way that just never got caught. They were trying to do the right thing. I really hope that that was the reason. I think the best way to amend this is to invite you and I to his restaurant and then give us a private dining table and have a full on conversation and explanation about how pretty I am and just letting me know what a wonderful person I am.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's the only way. We'll post it on our Instagram to make sure it's publicized.
Let's see if this happens.
Yes, everyone push for it. This will be our call to the people.
Call for accountability.
Yes, that probably won't happen, but if you are looking for something that's much more realistic, something that still brings joy to you, maybe, let's go into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Amy T. Wan. Amy T. Wan is an artist who seeks everyday magic, creates tools for wonder and creativity, and paints enchanted worlds. Amy T. Wan kind of feels like one of those artists who finds paintings within the painting. And what makes Amy T1 so special to me is that early in Steven and my relationship, Steven bought me one of her watercolor paintings with a bunny in it, knowing how much I enjoy her work. It's definitely an investment, but I highly, highly recommend her work. Amy also has a deck of wonders where you can find inspiration for your own artwork, whether that's painting, sketching, or some other way of finding art in the world. You can learn more about Amy T. Wan's work on their website at Amy T. Wan, that's AMYTWON.com, and on Instagram at Amy T. Wan. Again, that's AMYTWON. Won.
Yep. And we will post that painting that we have on our Instagram page with this episode because it was an investment. It was the most affordable investment I can make at the time, but it is a very beautiful painting that we have. But that is our recommendation for the week. Okay. Our sixth and final read of Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. We have made it to the end.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as much of a struggle as I thought it would be reading through these last little chapters.
Totally.
So we have read pages 439 through 527 and chapters 12 through 20 of part 3.
Mm-hmm.
Until this point, what did we know?
So until this point, we were in the coup wedding and its festivities. Before the coup wedding, Paiklin and Rachel were shopping for outfits, plural. During the coup wedding, there was a discovery of Nick, Francesca, and Mandy having a threesome. And after the wedding, Nick gets a full picture of what's been happening to Rachel and plans to get away to propose to her.
Right. In these final chapters, what we get is a more microscopic view of the two major relationships that we read through in this book.
Mm-hmm.
The first of which is Astrid and Michael. Now, within this, we also have Astrid and Charlie, Charlie, who's the ex of Astrid,
Mm-hmm.
but Charlie actually ends up being someone that helps her out quite a bit.
Right. Charlie allows his private investigator to look into Michael in order to track him down at Wuthering Towers in Hong Kong.
Right. And what we originally think of as Michael as this cheater, this person that's breaking up the marriage by having an affair, possibly having a child,
Mm-hmm.
we learned through this snooping that none of that was actually real.
Right. It turns out that Michael's just been staging an affair.
Right, and it's because he felt so disconnected from the relationship that he needed to find a way out. And instead of telling her the truth, which he felt like could hurt her family, he thought that if he was able to be the bad guy, it would make this whole situation better.
Right, which makes it, I guess the word of the night is yucky. It just feels yucky that he did this to her. Like, rather than thinking about Astrid's feelings, he was thinking about Astrid's family.
I think he was trying to think of both. I
Hmm.
think he was trying to protect Astrid. As I read through it, I found a redeeming quality in Michael in the fact that he wanted to still protect her, especially in the way that Astrid was retorting and saying, "No, let's stay in this marriage. I'll separate from my family." And Michael was saying, "That's not what I want you to do. I want you to be with your family. I don't want our relationship to break up because of it." But we also learn about the struggles that Michael had gone through within this whole relationship.
Mm-hmm. Right, and how he kind of felt like the help rather than like a part of the family.
Right. And her brothers had kind of told him that he would never get anything. It never seemed like he was going to be accepted.
Right.
And I guess if you're in that situation, it does make it really hard for you to feel one, like you can accept their money, which is maybe why he never accepted Astrid's father's help.
Mm-hmm.
And two, to just be in a relationship with someone where you know you'll have to see her family very often.
Totally. And we did talk about this in an earlier episode how we thought that their relationship was doomed from the beginning anyway.
Right.
They didn't even seem to match really. It was just like they were meant to fulfill a need in the moment, but not forever.
Right. And Michael admits that too. He says, "We were fun, we were doing things that were enjoyable, but maybe we should have never gotten married."
Mm-hmm. And like he was caught up in this whirlwind of activity and didn't even realize that he was going to marry her.
Right. And following this, they break up. Charlie tries to help Astrid by telling her, don't divorce him right away, see if he comes back. It's this whole messy situation of really not knowing where this ends up. There is a form of a cliffhanger of not really knowing where this relationship fully ends, I think.
Right.
I do think there might be more to this story. We also know that Charlie loves Astrid, but
Mm-hmm.
isn't trying to pursue that love, although he does help Astrid in a way by helping Michael.
Right. He tells Astrid that as a guy, he thinks that Michael's going to come back.
Right.
But behind Astrid's back, he schemes to create this fake bidding war on the stocks from Michael's company.
Right.
And I think he's trying to create this windfall that makes Michael even more rich than he is now.
Right, just so that Michael can see what a world is like, where
Mm-hmm.
he gets everything that he wants. And I think it's assuming that Michael won't like it and will then come back to Astrid.
Totally.
What do you think about the way that this relationship kind of came back around? And are you satisfied with the way that this one ended?
I could see that this was ending. So, yes, I was kind of okay with how everything played out.
Yeah, I think the way that it happened was maybe not the best way,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like both parties had some form of relief in being able to talk this all out and get
Mm-hmm.
each other's side of the story and the understanding of why the unhappiness was there. If Astrid had not gone to see Michael, I think this would have ended up much more poorly
Yes.
because there would be so many more questions of why. Why did he leave me? Was it because of this girl? Like, why was he cheating on me?
Mm-hmm.
So I think knowing that Michael was just trying to help her,
Yeah.
help himself too, but trying to figure out the best way that he wouldn't create the pain and the bad reputation and all that stuff. I think it helped Astrid feel better, and then Michael admitting that probably helped him feel better.
Totally. Do you think that it was weird that he involved his cousin?
I think that was more of a side story. Like, I think he was trying to find somewhere to go to,
Hmm.
and his cousin just happened to be that person. I don't know if he tried to necessarily involve her in the way that she was going to play a part in this breakup.
Hmm.
I think she just happened to be there.
Totally. Like, she was the easiest excuse to go to.
Right, exactly.
I see.
So that was one relationship.
Yep.
And like I said, it wasn't that bad.
No, not necessarily.
Our other relationship is, I think, our bigger one, which
Yes.
is Nick and Rachel.
Mm-hmm. Nick does whisk Rachel away to Malaysia to propose to her, and he has this elaborate plan to bring Rachel to his Ama's summer lodge and do this beautiful sunset type proposal.
Hmm.
However, Eleanor, Nick's mom, and Suyi, Nick's ama, beat them to the summer lodge, and Eleanor shares some big news.
And that news was a news to everybody
Yes.
because what she shares is that Rachel's father is still alive and in prison.
Mm,
What Rachel has been told her entire life by her mother is that her father is dead.
right. And Rachel also finds out that she gets kidnapped by her mom at a young age.
Right. So Rachel's finding out all of this information, and I think this is overload, and her
Right.
brain is kind of exploding with
Right.
information. And I think her only appropriate answer and response at this time was that she couldn't be with Nick anymore.
Totally. And beyond that information, the fact that all of this is coming from his family
Right.
is a lot to take in. Like, if I were Rachel, I would totally not know what to do.
Right. Because you weren't expecting this ambush.
For sure. Another thing that I would have done differently, though, is I think I would have called my mom right away.
Maybe, but she also just found out that her mother
Mm,
kidnapped her, which means that maybe she's not the person to trust. I'm pretty sure
mm,
there's a lot of confusion and trust issues going on at the same time.
fair.
So, what Rachel does do is that she hides away at Pecklin's house and just kind of stays holed in. She doesn't talk to Nick. She talks to Pecklin just in terms of just getting the basic necessities. And this tends to last until Rachel finally comes up with the idea that she wants to visit her father in mainland China.
Mm-hmm. But then she's stopped by Carrie, who was brought over to Singapore by Nick.
Right. And this is where we learn the rest of the story of Rachel's background, knowing that the father that she actually had wasn't the person in jail. It was this person that helped her mom out. And it's this whole elaborate detail of how abusive this man that was in prison that claims to be Rachel's father is,
Mhm.
and why Rachel's mother had protected her so much and avoided even bringing up this information.
Right, because Rachel needed to be protected from this person's family.
Right, right. In response to all this, as Rachel's finally starting to gain her bearings back, she starts to realize what she misses in Nick and the person
Mhm.
that Nick is. even though he has the money to fly her mom over, even though he has the money to do all these things to stop this process, the extra time that Nick takes to go to America, pick up Rachel's mom, bring her back, and stop this whole situation for Rachel, trying to both stay out of it but be a part of her life,
Yes.
makes Rachel realize that he still is that person that she had fallen in love with in New York.
Right. He's not this big shot in Singapore. He's just this person who happens to have a lot of money.
Right. In response to that, there's a point where Nick is trying to explain why he still went about the things that he did. And the way that he explains it is that he didn't really understand how his money really affected him. And he says he really doesn't know how much money he has because his family doesn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that this is enough? Like, it just for me did not feel like a good enough story for Nick to redeem himself for carrying on the way that he did.
I agree. It wasn't a good look.
Right.
His family might not be talking about money, but again, he was brought up in this world. He should have been aware of how it affects other people around him.
Right. And at the end of this, we finally see Rachel and her mom going to the hawker station, and Declan and Nick are joking around. So it's seemingly returning to the relationship that they had previously.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like this ending?
I felt a few things about the ending. The fact that all of the story behind Rachel's beginning of life packed into one chapter felt like a lot. And on top of that, it felt like it was trying so hard to get us to read the next book.
Yeah, the amount of story that's put in at the end just to make the next story juicy
Mm-hmm.
definitely feels like a lead on.
Yes, exactly. And even when I was reading it, I felt like this shouldn't have been the end.
Right, right. This is more of the climax in the story rather than the ending.
Exactly.
I thought that it was interesting to have so many lookovers in terms of what we viewed of Nick.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many things that he had done somewhat wrong in the way that he handled the dealings and the relationships between Rachel and his family.
Totally.
And none of that was really rectified. None of that was amended. He didn't really go and fix things with his mom and Amma. His grandmother is still pissed off at him, as far as we know from the story. So it didn't feel whole. It didn't feel finished, which I think is leading to the point of what you're saying, that it might be much more of a teaser than trying to create a finished story or a product.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, from the standpoint of trying to get someone to read the next book, this would do it. This definitely leads on to want more content,
Mm-hmm.
but it absolutely felt like a lot was jam-packed into this read.
Exactly. Which brings us to, do we plan on reading the next book?
No. Do you plan on reading the next book?
I do not. I was slightly intrigued and interested in going forward, but only to find out what happens to Amma and Eleanor.
Right. I'm curious in Astrid's story. I'm curious about the stories, but not enough to want me to read them. I'll
Hmm.
definitely watch the movies of them and the characters that I enjoyed from the movies.
Absolutely.
I didn't enjoy the characters in this book. Maybe it's the roundedness of them and the actual ability to see the selfishness and I guess the bad side of these characters. But I didn't really fall in love with any character in this book.
Exactly. It felt as though we were just riding this roller coaster of bad events.
One thing I noticed in this book was that we focused on two major relationships throughout the whole book, right? It was Astrid and Michael and Nick and Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we saw in Nick and Rachel is that Rachel was never going to be accepted because she didn't come from a strong family. She didn't have money. She wasn't someone that anyone knew.
Mm-hmm.
What we see from Michael is that he didn't come from a background of a strong family. He didn't have money. Nobody really knew him.
Right.
We see Astrid and Michael go through a relationship for I think 5 years, have a child, try to make it succeed, and see how miserable they actually are. We see Nick and Rachel entering that same situation with the same basis and catalyst for moving forward. Do you think that Astrid and Michael's relationship is a looking glass into the relationship of Nick and Rachel.
That's what I was thinking about earlier on. But something that makes Nick and Rachel's relationship different is that they have commonalities. They have things that they enjoy together.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike with Astrid and Michael, they didn't really have any common ground. They were
Right.
just both intrigued by each other.
Right. And I do think that makes a difference. But I also see, I think, what the author was trying to do, which is show how heavy the family influence can be and how much it can affect the relationship and the struggles that we might see that Rachel has as she tries to live in this new world of people that are much richer than her.
For sure.
In the end, did you enjoy the book?
I share similar feelings like you do. I felt like I couldn't really get into the story because I didn't have any character to root on for.
Mhm.
And like I've mentioned in previous episodes, there were a lot of things that came up that just record scratched and irked me.
Right. I didn't hate the book. I didn't enjoy it as much as I think other people did. I had high expectations for the book, knowing the
Mm.
movie that came out. Also, hearing so much about this book and how much people said that they really enjoyed it, I was expecting to like it a lot.
I had the same expectation. I had high, high, high hopes for it,
Right.
especially because I enjoyed the movie.
Right.
And because the movie was so good, or at least to me, the movie was so good, that I was expecting the book to blow me out of the water.
Right. It didn't do that for me. I do believe there are people that this book still hits home for.
Hmm.
So you might really enjoy this book. It's not a badly written book.
No, not at all.
It just didn't do it for me.
Same for me.
And we finished it though.
We did. It was not a DNF.
Yeah.
We absolutely made it to the end.
Yep. And it wasn't terrible.
Hmm.
Could have been better.
Could have been better, absolutely.
So our next episode is going to be us doing a watch through of the movie adaptation of Crazy
Mhm.
Rich Asians, which we know we'll enjoy because we've already enjoyed it many times.
Yes.
But we are also going to go into our next book, which I think I also have high hopes for.
So our next read is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Satanto.
Yep. And I think the important thing to know is that this should also be a fun and hopefully more lighthearted book.
Exactly. And a few more hints of jam for this book is that it shows up on many recommendation lists. It's set in San Francisco's Chinatown and is focused on a distinguished lady and her drive to solve who murdered a man in her tea shop.
Yep. So if you're into true crime, this might also be the book for you.
Yes. So let's take a look at the back of the book. It says Vera Wong is a lonely little old lady, a lady of a certain age, who lives above her forgotten tea shop in the middle of San Francisco's Chinatown. Despite living alone, Vera is not needy. Oh no. She likes nothing more than sipping on a good cup of oolong and doing some healthy detective work on the internet about what her Gen Z son is up to. Then one morning, Vera trudges downstairs to find a curious thing, a dead man in the middle of her tea shop. In his outstretched hand is a flash drive. Vera doesn't know what comes over her, but after calling the cops like any good citizen would, she sort of swipes the flash drive from the body and tucks it safely into the pocket of her apron. Why? Because Vera is sure she will do a better job than the police possibly can. Nobody sniffs out a wrongdoing quite like a suspicious Chinese mother with time on her hands. Vera knows the killer will be back for the flash drive. All she has to do is watch the increasing number of customers at her shop and figure out which one among them is the killer. What Vera does not expect is to form friendships with her customers and start to care for each and every one of them. As a protective mother hen, will she end up having to give one of her newfound chicks to the police?
Mm-hmm.
A little about the author. Jesse Q. Satanto is an award-winning and best-selling author who has a master's degree in creative writing from Oxford University. Jesse grew up in both Jakarta and Singapore.
Yep. And so for this book, our first read is going to be pages 1 through 84, which is also going to be chapters 1 through 10 for everybody.
Definitely, I'm excited about this book.
Yeah, so we'll see where this book takes us. But if anyone has any comments or you disagree that Crazy Rich Asians was a much better book than I think we gave it credit for,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts and how can people share those thoughts.
You can reach us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or join the conversation on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Yep, and we have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, and that has our bookstore, which has books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to give us a rating, a review, and a subscription on the podcast.
Yep, and always make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat! Bye!
Bye.